Good day, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Good Eats. I am your host, Oscar Stuart. We thank you all for tuning in once again, and glad to have you here. In our last episode, we had the soil doctor, as I call him, the compost guru, Dr. Abimbola Abiola. And so, in our last episode, he would have got into composting. Why do we compost, and how would we compost, and the benefits of compost. And so in conclusion to that, we will have Dr. Abiola again for the follow-up and what is part 2 to that episode. So for those of you who missed it, part 1, you would have to go back to our YouTube channel and seek that, because it's some good stuff. And once again, we thank you all here for being here today. And so we'll get right into it. But before we get into it, I would just like to say that once again, we are kind of reminiscing to last year, catastrophic hurricane that took place here in the Bahamas, devastating Abaco and Freeport. And as everybody knows, it left us reeling, and particularly from an agricultural standpoint. And so we're getting on the topic for farmers, and whether it's backyard farmers, commercial farmers, on soil treatment, amendment, management. And so we will bring to you Dr. Abiola. And for those who did not get to see our last episode, and hopefully you will get there, we're going to just mention briefly who is and what does Dr. Abiola does. Dr. Abimbola Abiola is an international technical specialist in the climate change and natural resources program at IECA headquarters. He was IECA's representative in Haiti between the years 2016, 2019, and Suriname 2013, 2019. His experiences are in environmental waste management, sustainable energy production, composting, and organic farming. He is a professional agrologist with over 40 years of international research, teaching, consulting, and management experience. Dr. Abiola holds a Bachelor of Science in Microbiology, a Master's of Science in Environmental Microbiology, and a PhD in Microbial Ecology from the University of Regina, Canada. Dr. Abimbola is a leading advocate on the production and use of compost and other organic matters for food production and remediation of degraded soil. And so, ladies and gentlemen, we're gonna plow deeper into an enlightening, enriching discourse, and very timely with Dr. Abiola, who is now here joining us from his IECA headquarters in Costa Rica. Dr. Abiola, how are you again today, sir?
Well, it's a pleasure to be here and to be with the people of the Bahamas again. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you once again. Once again, I am very grateful and privileged, and I'm sure we all are, to have you give us your opportunity to share in your most important time. And so we'll not waste any time. We'll get back into this, continue this enriching course, your presentation. And so I want to just get right into it today by asking you, Dr. Abiola, how do we compost? For those out there, backyard farmers, commercial farmers, tell us, please, how do we compost?
Well, thank you very much, Stuart. The last time we talked about should we compost. We looked at the benefits of composting and a lot of other things relating to compost itself, how you use it and others. Today we will talk about how do you do the process. How do you go from the waste and get high quality product? So a product that will be useful, that will meet those requirements we talked about yesterday in terms of acceptability by users. So today, we'll talk about the process of composting. I decided to just put a few things up here because composting itself it starts before you put your piles together. It starts in the selection of the particular type of materials or waste. I don't want to call them waste because I prefer to call them resources that you want to compost. And we usually divide them into two. Your primary ingredient, which is the major thing that you want to compost. For example, in Abaco or Grand Bahama, for example, with a lot of the wood waste is going to be your initial material that you want to compost. And then we'll look at what is the amendment, what do you need to add to it to make it compostable. You may need to, first of all, shred the material, if necessary, and then you form it into a windrow or par, and we'll talk more about this later. And then it goes in these blue areas in the process of composting itself, where it reaches a temperature that we say is thermophilic. And then, but after it passes that temperature, the composting hasn't finished. It has to be cured. I will talk a little bit more about that later. This is actually one of the most important things is to understand that for composting to occur, these 6 conditions must be met for us to say it has occurred. One, your pile temperature must get to at least 55 degrees Celsius. It is critical. That temperature is the temperature at which any pathogens or any weed seeds or any other type of bad things and vermin in your compost are destroyed. For that to happen, the moisture content of your material that you start with must be between 50 and 65. If it gets above that, it gets too wet. If it gets below that, it's too dry for the microbes to grow. We want it to be very close to neutral in terms of acidity. I put a number here. This is just for measurement, between 5.5 and 8.5. We also want it to, we say yesterday or the other time we talked about it being an aerobic process, which means it needs oxygen. The oxygen it must be more than 10% if you can measure it. But if you cannot measure it, you have to mix it in such a way that oxygen is always in there. And you cannot just put a big log of wood in there and think that it's going to compost. But the particle size should be less than 5 centimeters. Therefore, if you have large materials, you need to shred them before you compost them. And also the ratio of carbon to nitrogen. I would say the ratio of energy to protein, or the ratio of brown to green. Scientifically, we say it should be between 25 and 40, 25 to 1 and 40 to 1. Energy is used by the microbes because it's like us going through aerobic process. When you are doing aerobics, you burn the calorie, you produce the heat, and then you build muscles. The same thing they need it. So they need the food. It's important for me to say this because this is very, very important. When we say the green materials, they are generally materials that have nitrogen in them, very high in nitrogen. They are usually the source of proteins in there. And they include everything from green grass. That's the reason why when you pile your green grass overnight, it starts to stink because of ammonia and nitrogen in there. Meat products, many things that you know have proteins, manures, and even nitrogen fertilizers, because the source of nitrogen can be used as a green source. For brown materials, it includes things that are very high in carbon. They tend to be the energy source. Brown leaves, wood chips, paper, starchy food, or sugars. These are just examples of those. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. So for those out there, remember your compost, the temperature, keep it moist, need oxygen, brown and green matter. And so Dr. Abiola, what we want to do right at this moment is take a quick break, and we'll be back in just short order, everyone. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Now, Dr. Abiola.
Yes.
Returning. So quickly, before we get into what happens and what's involved in composting. Please, for those out there watching who may not understand, tell the audience first, please, in layman terms, so to speak, what are pathogens?
Okay, I will talk about that. Okay, I'll talk about. Okay, thank you. Hello.
Hello. Yeah. So, what are pathogens and what's involved in composting?
When many of the materials that we compost, they actually contain bacteria, viruses, fungi. These are microbes that are capable of causing diseases in human beings, in plants, in animals. You don't want to produce a compost that has any of these types of organisms in them. And therefore, it is important that during the process of composting, you get rid of those organisms that we call pathogens. Pathogens are microbes and others that are able to cause diseases in plants and animals.
Okay, and we've heard a lot of debate about whether meat product is actually good to use in compost. A lot of persons have not used them, as I myself. So, but please tell us what's involved in composting and what happens during composting. Yes, what happens?
Okay, first of all, let's deal with the idea of meat products. You can compost meat products. The problem is that when people are doing it in their backyard and they have materials only like one bowl of waste or even a bucket or two, the temperature in the pile is usually, in many cases, too low. It doesn't reach the 55 degrees threshold that I mentioned earlier on. So to avoid having insects, having flies and others, they will tell you don't put materials that potentially may have pathogens, which would be like meat products and others in there. Yeah. So often, if you can manage it well and you understand the process, and that's what we are going to talk about now. Like when we are dealing with issues in Abaco or in Grand Bahama, and you are managing the process well at the commercial level, it can receive anything, whether we are talking about meat products, another type of things, because you manage it, the temperature in the copper reaches that 55 degrees Celsius threshold. So I just want to clear that. Yes. In backyard composting, the reason why we are therefore cautious or asking people not to put like pet droppings, that they may not put even milk products, or anything that may contain pathogens, is just because often that temperature threshold is not met. So what happens during the process of composting? I would say there are 5 stages in the process. The first stage is when you mix your material. That's what we call the lag phase. You mix your material, it's not heating up. It may take a day, it may take 2 hours, it may take 4 hours. The closer that the conditions in your compost is within that optimum range that I gave you, the shorter the period that we call the lag phase. So if everything is right, within 1 or 2 hours, the temperature starts going up. The next phase is what we call the active phase. So you're at the beginning here is the lag phase. It may be long, it may be short. And then we have the active phase. This is when now your temperature starts to go up here. Followed by that is, because the temperature goes all the way up to here, up to about 55. In many cases, if the condition is really optimum, it can even get to as high as 65 degrees Celsius, very, very hot. It's required to stay in these conditions for a minimum of 2 weeks. And during that period, you turn it to put in more oxygen. Yeah. And after that, the compost starts to go down in temperature to what we call the temperature descent phase. Once it gets to that temperature descent phase, is going down, it gets to a point where it levels out. That is when the curing starts. Your composting hasn't finished, even though the temperature has topped. It takes time before it matures. It's like wine. When you make wine, alcohol is there already, but the flavor and everything that makes the wine what it is depends on how long you will mature it in maturity. Therefore, sometimes some compost will stop heating, but it's still not finished and it may be toxic. So it will be necessary to make it mature and reach and be before you use it. So the next thing I think we need to talk about is how do you do it? What are the various systems?
Yes. Yes, please tell us what are the systems and the options for composting.
The first thing I want to say is that it's not good for you to just compost everything. I've seen situations where people say, well, we can compost everything, we separate it at the end. We always recommend that materials you want to compost must be source separated at the initial stage before you start composting. If you have inorganic materials, plastics, glass, or anything in your material, it's going to affect the final quality of your compost. It's like putting garbage in, you get garbage out. And yesterday, we were talking about some other things in other situations where compost that may contain any of these are not desirable by users. So, for your backyard composting, you remember I mentioned that a little while ago, kitchen scrap, yard waste, and some other household waste are useful, but we don't recommend meat just for the reason that it may contain some pathogens. But if you have the bulk and you manage it well, turn it right, the temperature reaches 55, there's no harm in adding it. There are different backyard composting systems. I will just show just a few pictures so that people will know. You don't really have to buy a backyard composter, but you can either make your own, you can use the 3-bin systems where you can use your own wires to make it or any other things. Or there are some prefabricated types of backyard composters. These are just some examples, and some of these are commercially available, but you will see that like this one here is just one that people are making out of the wire rims, the one they use for doing when they are putting some of these cable rims. You just they open it, and therefore it makes it easy to put the materials inside and roll it and mix it without dumping it outside. So these are just different systems. Like this one, you can tumble it, you don't have to take it out. But many of these ones, that are these type of bins, you have to once in a while turn it to make it oxygen go through them. We also have situations, because those are just backyard composting. But when you are dealing with large piles, you have to make big piles of compost. If you pile it in one place, it's what we call static piles. And those static piles, often you can either blow air through it to allow oxygen to go through it properly, or you can suck air through it, you can put a pump in them. If you cannot, you have to find a way to turn them either with an equipment, with a front-end loaders, and other. We have the systems that we call windrows. These are long rows of materials that you put together. This makes it easy to manage. You can monitor your temperature, you can monitor your moisture, you can go through it, and you can have different rows for different times of the day or that you receive the materials. Okay. And windrows, if you are going to put windrows, you must have the proper equipment to turn it so that it turns the material and it aerates the material. There are different equipments very currently available. I'm just showing a few of those type of systems, especially when you get to the point where you are producing compost on a large scale. There are some other systems that are called in-vessel systems. These are huge, large systems whereby you can put the material at one end, it literally comes out at the other end, but these are expensive, and usually it is big companies that may be able to afford it, or municipalities, they use some of those. There are some small in-vessel systems, especially when you are dealing with food waste and others, or institutional waste. I just put an example here whereby they can put the material in at the end here, at the left end, and it comes out, you can see the material has been screened at the other end 28 days after, almost ready as compost. Those are examples.
Okay, thank you. And so I see you have a slide here on troubleshooting. So can we just quickly get into that, or we could
Yes.
just, yes.
What happens is that often you have people have problems with their composting pile. There are two major problems that people always have. One, the compost pile doesn't heat up, or there's odor, it stinks.
Mm-hmm.
If your compost pile doesn't heat up, there are two problems. Either that you have too low oxygen, you don't have enough oxygen in there, which may be because it's too wet, or you have, in that particular situation, your carbon to nitrogen, the brown to green amount is inadequate. And in many of these cases, it's either that the greens are too little. So you may need to add a little bit more to that. You may adjust it.
Mm-hmm.
The second one is it may be stinking. So if that may mean that you have too much greens in many cases, and you may need to add a little bit more brown materials to reduce the odor. The other fact is if it is too wet, that means oxygen is not getting in. You may need to add other materials that are high in carbon, that are dry as bulking agent, and mix it in. That will reduce the odor.
Thank you, Dr. Abiola. Reminded me when I started voice composting. For those who watching, I just would use a plastic container, one of those said that the people always bring away when they go shopping in the States. The bins, and I drilled some holes in it. And my green matter, my dry matter, and so I would be turning, and I would keep it wet. And so for those watching, particularly in the backyard farming with small gardens, remember uh, you don't have to turn every 2 weeks. No meat, and remember your dry matter, your green matter, your brown matter, so to speak, and keep your compost wet. Water is important for the living microorganism. So once again, we want to gratefully thank you for your time here with us and let you know how much we appreciate it, as I'm sure our audience out there do as well. Everybody, once again, Dr. Abimbola Abiola, the soil and compost guru, as I call him. I am very anxious to looking forward to meet you when you get here in Grand Bahama, Dr. Abiola.
Thank you very much. And we hopefully next, in any of our next episode, always very interested in working with kids and even many people in their homes that are interested in using worms for composting. So hopefully
Yeah.
we'll look at how to do that one and how best to manage that one for it to give you the same type of high quality compost. Thank you very
Yes,
much.
yes. Definitely later on down in episodes, we're going to get the kids very well involved. We want a lot of kids involved in taking interest in this agriculture and this farming aspect of it. And so those episodes are coming. Thank you very much, Dr. Abiola, once again.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Yes. You as well. You take care. Okay, folks. Dr. Abimbola Abiola. Like they say in the Bahamas, I call him the compost and soil daddy. So we'll be right back after these messages. Okay, and now we're back once again to that time of the day. It's in my cup. It was recommended to me that I should get a see-through cup. What y'all think? Leave some messages in the comments. Let me know what you think. And by now, you should know the routine. Let's see if you can take another crack at it. See if we can have another winner. What's in this cup? Let's think green again today because we're going green and we turn that trash, that compost into money for those that may be interested in doing composting as a business. And so we're going green. And so my smoothie once again today is green. Come on, get those ingredients, anybody out there. And so before we wrap it up, let's say thanks to Aika, Dr. Abiola once again. Uh, thank my director out there, my RBN family. And I want to say, folks, as it relates to the hurricanes, and because this is extended beyond the Bahamas, it's a regional thing, even to America. So to all my people, all my family, friends out there watching, Haiti, Jamaica, Cuba, those in Florida, Houston, Texas, see out there, my family in Alabama, all the way down to my friends in New York. We all being impacted and infected by hurricanes at some point in time down there. Don't forget my people in Louisiana. We thank you very much, and we hope that this information here shared by Dr. Abiola today can be very useful for you to whatever level of farming, gardening you're on. We thank you very much for tuning in, and we ask you once again, have a great weekend. Thank you.